We're ready?
We're live.
Good job, Noah. I love the hearings. I mean, I feel like every one of us has to.
Sounds good. That might be a little much. They're good.
We are live.
Good.
Okay, we're going to get started on our committee of the whole meeting now, please. Are we on, Bridget?
We're on.
Okay. Good evening. At 6:44 PM on Monday, October 28th, 2024. I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Bridget, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Niramatsu?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
President Garvey?
Here. Thank you. The first item was going to be a discussion of proposed draft request for proposal for documents, or for village-owned property located at 3723 Grand Boulevard, the theater building. But due to some changed circumstances and staff needs some additional time to possibly modify that, so we're going to table that possibly to the meeting 2 weeks from now. So, sorry if anyone came just for that tonight. So we're going to move on to the next item, which is consideration of the Des Plaines River Trail South Extension Phase 1 project costs. We have a very detailed memo, once again, related to this. This is a project that I know the whole board is familiar with and a lot of the public. Again, the memo we have, it does a very good summary of it, but I'm going to, Derek, do you want to just, are you going to take the lead on this, and you want to provide just a summary of what the project is, where it's at, or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Derek Trikel's our village engineer. Thanks, Derek.
Good evening. As President Garvey mentioned, we're here to provide just a brief update on the overall project, but mainly we want to focus tonight on the 31st Street bike path. Ciorba has been at work working on the Phase 1 project development report, and they have provided 3 alternate routes for us to take a look at and consider on 31st Street. Ultimately, at the end of the presentation, what we'll be looking for is direction from the village board if there's a preference on which one of the routes they'd like us to move forward with. So just as a little bit of background, this study started back in 2019 where the village agreed to serve as a lead agency for a Phase 1 report for the south extension of Des Plaines bike path. The bike path includes sections that are in the village of Riverside, the village of Lyons, and within the village of Brookfield. And some of these bike paths lie on Cook County Forest Preserve property. So those are the 4 main stakeholders. I will mention, as part of this Phase 1, they're also doing an intersection design study at 31st Street and Maple. We had Ciorba in about a month or 2 ago where they provided a presentation on that. That's also part of this report, but not what we'll be discussing tonight. The Cook County, we've been working with Cook County quite a bit, and their priority is to fill the gaps in along the Salt Creek Trail that runs along First Avenue and Ogden Avenue. So along First Avenue, starting at approximately Parkview Avenue, they're going to fill in a gap between Parkview and Ogden Avenue, and then running east on Ogden Avenue, there's a few gaps in the trail. I think we've talked about these before. I do have an exhibit we can go back to at the end if there's questions from the board, but it's really more to overview. The focus tonight is on 31st Street. So the path on 31st Street is classified as a connector route. So it's not part of the Forest Preserve's main trail system. And what that means, as we've talked with them, is this is something initiated by the village, is a desire by the village to have a connector to the main trail system. It also means that the village would be responsible for the local share, which is 20% of the costs. We're anticipating getting grants for 80% of the costs. And it also means the village on this 31st Street connector route would be responsible for the maintenance of that project. So after completing their initial study of the route, Ciorba has presented the following 3 options for consideration. This is option 1. It includes the bike path on 31st Street from Prairie Avenue running east to First Avenue. Brookfield has a couple of main priorities. One is to establish a connection with the Salt Creek Trail that lies at the north end of McCormick up by Cantata. We're trying to provide a connection because right now, when you're at the intersection of Prairie, there is no connection going east on 31st Street. The second one is at the corner of McCormick and 31st Street, there's a bike entrance to the zoo. So we're trying to provide connection and access to that bike entrance. This option one is the preferred alternate of the forest preserve. They'd like to keep it on the south side the entire way. It happens to be the most costly. It is mainly due to some additional costs because there's quite a bit of tree impact that we're encountering on here. A lot of it's on forest preserve property. When you're removing trees on forest preserve property, there's not only the cost for the tree removal, but they also have a price you pay to forest preserve for the tree that you're taking down. And then the other thing that we have on this route is there's quite a few berms there that in order to install the path, they're gonna have to install a number of retaining walls. So the summary of costs here is total estimated cost is approximately $7.3 million for option one, and the village's share is a little under $1.5 million for option one. And again, I'll state, this is the preferred route of the forest preserve. The village has presented the next two options for consideration, and we want to discuss those with the board. So moving on to option two, what we looked at is this option would include the path on the south side of 31st from Prairie Avenue running east approximately to that forest preserve driveway entrance. They have a parking lot there. Then it would cross to the north side. It is a mid-block crossing, meaning it's not at a traffic signal, what's being proposed. The Forest Preserve had some concerns with it. We did point out to them that there is some precedent. We're probably all familiar with the area. Is further west on 31st Street in Westchester, there is also a mid-block crossing. They actually have a higher bicycle traffic on that crossing because it's part of the main route. And the 31st Street traffic is a little heavier once you get west of LaGrange Road. Okay. Thank you. So part of the reason we're selecting on Prairie, from running Prairie to the Forest Preserve driveway, part of the reason the south side select is that was looked at 10, 15 years ago when the bridge was installed. And they have a 10-foot sidewalk that's already part of the bridge constructing there. So it makes sense to be on the south side. The north side also has a pretty severe drop-off after you get to the north edge of pavement. But we'll have the mid-block crossing. Again, we're roughly at the Forest Preserve driveway entrance. We would stay on the north side of 31st from that driveway entrance, east to McCormick, and then further east all the way to Gulfview. We had initially looked at staying on the north side all the way up to First Avenue. The Forest Preserve has significant concerns with the tree impacts on the north side of 31st between Gulfview and First Avenue. So this proposal would include a second crossing going from the north side to the south at Gulfview Avenue, which is a signalized intersection. So a little better place for a crossing than the mid-block crossing. And then it would run along the south side from Gulfview to First Avenue or connect to the existing path. Couple reasons why we proposed the north side. One, much less impacts, almost very few trees on the north side between McCormick and Gulfview. Also, it gives us, we'd like to cross and have a direct connection to McCormick so they can go north on McCormick to the Salt Creek Trail and also utilize the existing bike entrance to the zoo. This is in the middle of the range of the three options for cost options. This is about $4.7 million total costs, brings the village share down to $950,000. So it's about $500,000. Village share would be $500,000 less than the option one. And the last thing we looked at, these costs with the tree removal, the retaining walls are pretty extensive. So staff kind of got together after our last meeting with Suorba and came up with, are there any other options? And we want to look at, this third option looks at, it's essentially the same as option 2 with the mid-block crossing at the Forest Preserve driveway, but it stops at McCormick, okay? So the downside to this as compared to option 2 is, does not extend all the way to First Avenue. However, it does meet our main 2 objectives of connecting, providing a direct connection to McCormick and going north to the Salt Creek Trail. It also provides access to the zoo's bike entrance. When looking at the costs for installing the rest of the path, could you go back one, sorry? The rest of the path from McCormick to First Avenue, the decision we're looking for input on the board is it worth those additional costs to put that the east half of the path in? Keep in mind, if you're accessing the Salt Creek Trail and going north and west on it, you have that direct access with this option via McCormick Avenue. So we don't think there's any less benefit as far as that access. As far as the zoo entrance, same sort of access with this. The one thing you don't have is another tie-in to the First Avenue path, but I think we all know we have access to that First Avenue path on Washington Avenue right now, which is about a half mile south of here. And we did just stripe the bike lanes from Gulf Road all the way to Kemen. So we have nice on-road bike lanes that provide access to that First Avenue path. And the costs on this option brings the total cost down to about 2.9 million. Village share is just under 600,000. And in comparison, that is about 360,000 less than option 2 and about $880,000 less than option 1 as far as the village share. Go to the next slide, please. So next steps. We've been working, it's been this phase 1 report's been going on for a few years. There's a lot of study been done. The next step we'd like to get to is presenting to IDOT, but we have to have the routes picked out before we go to IDOT and know what sort of variances we're gonna request from IDOT. So we're asking for some discussion tonight, and if possible, we'd like to get direction from the board regarding preferred option for the bike path on 31st Street. After that, we'll meet with the Forest Preserve, let them know what the board's direction is, and then continue on with the phase 1 report.
Thank you, Derek. Before I open up discussion of the board, I want to talk a little bit more about the process. I mean, whose final decision is this? I mean, if this board were to give their preferred route or direction on the preferred route and and the Forest Preserve disagrees, who has the final say about this?
It's been a little unclear. It's been a little odd in that the Forest Preserve has indicated that this is a connector route. They're not going to be able to fund it, and that's part of their mission statement. That's not just Brookfield. They don't fund the connector routes, and the village has maintenance, and yet they've been, Tim will acknowledge, they've been a driving force in some of these meetings. I don't want to call it combative, but there's been some disagreements between village staff where they want the route and where the Forest Preserve. So, long answer, but I'm not sure, but if the village, for instance, chose that third option, we would go back to the Forest Preserve and present that to them. And if the Forest Preserve insists that it go to First Avenue, I don't know that they get to insist, quite frankly, because it's a connector route that the community is desiring. I don't know that I think they'd prefer it. I must mention too, Cook County Department of Transportation Highways got involved, and they actually, I think we all remember there was a addendum or a supplement to the Suorba agreement. It was quite a bit. It was $300,000.
Right.
And they funded the entire thing. So they stepped in to keep this project going. I want to acknowledge that. But we're looking at these kind of higher total costs here. One option, if we're keeping the costs on option 3, we can explore if the Forest Preserve wants option 1 or 2, will they pick up those additional costs above option 3?
I mean, because what's sort of interesting is, you know, some of the costs are replacement or the tree costs, which are being imposed by them. And, you know, and the zoo has talked about, I mean, we had the good fortune of having their master plan presentation there on the new emphasis on the north gate and the north entrance. I mean, you would think, I know they want people using that north gate and, you know, bicycle traffic coming in there. I think they get a lot of traffic from that. So I think it's something we can work through and negotiate with the zoo. I just wanted to kind of set the table for the board's discussion. And, you know, in terms of time frame, as you were saying those dollar amounts, I saw Doug's head Doug was rubbing his head back there. I mean, what is the time frame for us, you know, appropriating, expending money, doing something like this? I mean, these are large dollar amounts under any scenario.
So we're in phase 1 this year. I don't anticipate phase 1 approval till end of '25, early '26.
Okay.
Then we go into phase 2, which takes 6 to 9 months, so quite some time. You might have phase 2 engineering in late '26, '27, construction, probably earliest. These are optimistic,
Sure.
'28.
Again, that's something I just wanted to kind of put in the board's mind, so. Derek, do you have anything else now in terms of presentation?
No.
Tim, do you have anything to add on behalf of staff? You know, before I open it up to the board, if there's any public comment, and I specifically see Chris Valdez from Cycle Brookfield here, who's been a major proponent of this. Chris, is there anything you'd like to say to the board at this point? And I'll open it up to everyone. It's not just Chris, but if there's anyone else who would like to say something just before the board starts discussion.
Yeah, thank you for welcoming me tonight. Chris Valdez, President of Cycle Brookfield, 501c3, located here in Brookfield with the sole mission to make it safe, fun, and equitable to ride in and around Brookfield. So the connector route that's been proposed by the engineering group is very important to our group. It's actually part of the reason that this group was formed 7-8 years ago here in Brookfield. We had an overwhelming need for this bike path to connect not only to the zoo, but to the Salt Creek Trail system. I do want to also underscore and state, not just a bike path, but it's also a multi-use pedestrian path. So I see, I'm sure like most of us who use 31st Street, as we're driving down, we see bikes using the road. We see pedestrians, sometimes parents with strollers pushing down alongside the road at 31st Street. We all know that the speed limit is marked at 35, but I can often say that, you know, cars exceed that limit quite frequently. In fact, I was driving down the other night about midnight. I saw a very, very nice young woman walking right along the path. If I didn't see her with my lights on, it could have been a pretty dire situation. I was driving. So I do encourage the board to adopt and look at some of the phase studies that are here, not just from a public stance point, but this is I can tell you every time a new member comes and walks into one of our bike rides or indoor events, the first complaint that we always receive is, why isn't there a path to the zoo? Why can't bikes access it? Why can't pedestrians access it? So as a group that represents not only cycling, but also safe access and transportation, I have been privy to, you know, active transportation board and street plans, part of the CDOT group that as well that is participating in that. It is overwhelmingly, especially not just for Brookfield, Riverside, North Riverside as well, to see this bike lane and multi-use path come to fruition. I see many options that work. I see some things that don't here. I do encourage the board to look at this from a long view standpoint. I understand, you know, financial dollars can be a driving force in how you make a decision. However, I encourage the board to look at it from a long-term use perspective. Connecting both First Avenue to Prairie, using that connector route for not only the path, but for use of safe pedestrian access, and as President Garvey mentioned, access to the zoo north end lot is going to be the preferred entrance, as the south end is going to be closed on in their master planning. So providing some level of long-term access, not only from the east of the zoo entrance, but also to the west, is going to allow Riverside, Berwyn, other districts to really feed into the zoo, which ultimately helps how Brookfield is looked at. So we would do a service to connect the entire stretch from First Ave to Prairie, not just for our residents of Brookfield, but our friends in the neighboring towns just east over. So I do encourage, you know, if I were to put a stance out here, option 1, go for option 1. It's a big dollar amount. Groups like Cycle Brookfield, as a 501c3, are here to actually help the village, here to help staff to go through planning. We we can work with the groups, even accept, different grant funds through there, and that's actually why we exist. We're happy to do that. We're happy to work with board staff and any amount of work that we would need to do to sit around and volunteer our way through that. We're really happy to do that. But I do encourage an option like option one, but also consider where at McCormick, where that crossing is, just adding an additional light crossing so we can service the needs of bikes that would ultimately use that, but also look from a pedestrian standpoint to move forward. But hence the reason I'm here today is to put my approval for board, please do adopt something that does help your residents and the neighboring towns access a zoo and safely pass 31st Street without any fatality incidents. But thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to make any public comment? CP, is that you raising your hand? Yep.
CP Hall, 3837 Woodside. I appreciate everything you just said. My favorite idea would be running from First Avenue to Prairie also, and I think the cost is utterly exorbitant. I have a suggestion for, and suggestion for is you go from Prairie Avenue to the entrance of the Forest Preserve parking lot. The parking lot is a straight shot up, and then you have a bike trail already there that goes over to McCormick. It's already in place. So if you do that, first of all, it'll be interesting to see who comes out of the woodwork to offer to pay for some of the rest of it if they really wanted to go all the way to First Avenue. And you suggested that in your discussion yourself that there was a question there as to whether somebody else would really want this, somebody else was willing to come up with some money if they wanted to family it up. And for the Brookfield bicyclist, you're going from Prairie Avenue to there, and I would think the zoo would want to at least extend it to their entrance themselves. That's my best guess, and that's exactly what it cost you to get me to come up here and say that. But that's my thought for the moment. That's a plan for it would be, what, maybe half to two-thirds of the cost for Plan 3, and that would be even better. And it would be a good start. If I hope it goes all the way through the First Avenue one day, I really do. But I'm sitting here looking at it and saying, I'm gonna be over 80 years old before this thing's over. I'd like to think I'll still be riding a bike.
Thank you, CP. And you're right on the time frame that it's taken, and that's why I caution the board to look at this as kind of it's frustrated us all to get to this point. I just have a little bit of caution to say, well, it's a good start, because think how long it would take to finish it down the road if the board has a mindset that the connection to First Avenue is important. I wouldn't count on or rely on future boards or future government agencies having the ability to move this through. I think that you should consider how long it took us to get to this point and keep that in mind going forward. In terms of the finances, the staff and myself and the board are continuously looking out for ways, and that's part of the negotiations here in terms of what could happen in terms of the cost and cost sharing and who desires what. As I brought up, some of the things about the extension and taking down trees, and Cook County prefers a certain route, but then we'd be paying to take down trees on their route. I think some of that is something that could be discussed. I've had both state and federal officials question why this doesn't exist, and I explained to them why it doesn't exist, and always get let us know what we can do to help. I'm going to be very quick to let them know what they can do to help. They can provide funding for this. So that's the type of thing that there could be some type of funding for it going forward through the state or federal government, and additional money from the county if possible. So. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to say anything at this point in time on this topic? Okay. Village Board, what's your thoughts?
I do. I feel like Chris set me up, actually. I'm not in favor of option 3 right off the bat because it doesn't connect it to the zoo. It really doesn't connect it to the gate and the entrance that you can get off of 31st Street. And I don't think that will ever happen. If we don't do it now, it's just not going to happen. As far as option 2, I have a fear that if we don't make it a straight path, and I understand we're calling it a bike path, but Chris is absolutely correct. This isn't just going to be used by people on bikes. It's going to be used by people on foot. It's going to be used by other means. And if they're going to be expected to cross 31st Street twice to get to the zoo, I'm not in favor of that because I think that could actually present more of a danger, more of a hassle. I personally would rather just make it a straight shot all the way down. You'd have access to the zoo. It would be safer in the long run. And then you do have a crossing section, just like you would west of here on 31st Street, where you have the Salt Creek Trail, the path right there. You already have something that's out there, so people are already used to it when they get on 31st Street. We repeat that there at the entrance to the Salt Creek Trail right over there. So you can still have it, but I don't think it should be a required path for a pedestrian to take to walk to the zoo, to walk down, have to cross 31st Street, walk down again, and cross it again. I would rather, I'm sticking, I like option one. I feel it's the safest and it's the best interest for our community. However, this also brings another question, and this is probably towards Derek, and this is why I keep looking at you, is the crossing path at the stoplight at Gulf View, right? Is there already a walk signal there? Or is that something that we're not responsible for adding a walk signal there, would we? I mean, we still want to have a walk signal crossing there if we do have any path there. Who was responsible for that point? Is that now, because it's a collector route, that's a different?
Yeah, typically, it would be the municipality. That's an interesting one, because I think that's the village limit between Brookfield and Riverside. I'd have to look into that as to who'd have ultimate responsibility, but I don't think it'd be IDOT. They typically are just, their business is moving motorists, so like on other bike paths, I'm aware that they send out letters to villages to restripe the, bike path, the bike crossings and that. And I may have misspoke, just to be clear, with option 3, that there is access for the pedestrians to the zoo and for the bikes, right at the northwest corner of McCormick and 31st Street. That's where their bike entrance is. It's really, it's signed, and then there's a gap in the fence, so.
Oh, really, that little bit right there? Because I always see everybody goes all the way down to the other main area where all the signage is at Gulf View and 31st Street, and then there's an entrance point there, too.
Yeah, I know all that, and I'm not as familiar with the pedestrian travel. I know that's where all the vehicles, of course, go in, but, yeah, there would be, and the zoo, if needed, could sign it, put additional signage.
But then people coming in off the bike path from North Riverside and that side of Oak Brook, but that side of Riverside would have no connection to go to the North Gate at that point. They'd have to go all the way around to Gulf View, come down Gulf View on the road, and then cross at that section. But if we made it straight across, they would have a direct shot, as he said. Our neighbors, it would be, option one is my preference.
Sure.
And I think it's a safer bet, and I think it's, long-term, I think it's the better idea.
In that scenario, maybe Riverside, North Riverside maybe we can approach them about, it would be a benefit to their residents to access the zoo and things. The funding has to be a part of the board's thought, but I keep open the possibility that the village's share could change or, be lessened by some contributions from other agencies, and whether it's grants or cooperation with other towns and stuff. But
And I like your idea of reaching out. We have a Cook County Commissioner that likes to come here and ask us if we need anything. Well, now we would need something. This would be good action.
So I'd like to back up about almost 10 years on this, when I think the discussions on this had started. And it was kind of, there's a lot of different parties involved in this, a lot of different groups, statewide, area-wide, et cetera. I think it was in 2015, then Cook County Commissioner Tobalski tried to bring everyone together to have a discussion where we're in the same room. And I think there might have been 30 or 40 of us in the room at his office talking about this. And we were looking at the different phases of it, including along First Avenue, from 26th, I think, to 31st, and then the 31st to Ogden. The most costly stretch of it that was being talked about was the stretch we're talking about tonight. What we couldn't seem to do at that time was get to the idea of how these projects would be funded. And I think it was Riverside and North Riverside kind of took it upon themselves to do the small stretch between 26th and the school. They wanted Brookfield to participate, and my thought at that time was we should be looking at how this whole project is funded. Well, that little segment was done. Now we're to the point where we're looking at the biggest part of this project after all these years. And I'll say the same thing now that I said then. This sure seems to be a regional project. Where is it? Now, obviously, you have federal funding is a huge part of this. When and where did this become Brookfield's sole part to be the one connecting these routes? That doesn't make sense. I mean, this is a huge county project. We're looking to connect to the Salt Creek Trail north of 31st. You're out of Brookfield real quick there. You're in the North Riverside. There's a lot of people that benefit from this besides Brookfield. And I'll just go back to the funding. I think the best route for this is Prairie to First Avenue. But as CP mentioned, the funding on this is crazy. And this should not be coming down to the village of Brookfield for almost $2 million for that. You know, the county seems to have washed their hand of so much of this to the point where they're going to tell us, if you take down trees, it's going to cost you, but we want you to take those trees down. That does not make sense. So to me, it's the funding thing, and it always has been from all the discussions we have had on this. It's a great idea connecting them, but why is it Brookfield's sole responsibility to connect this?
I agree with option one as well, but the funding is crazy. And so I'd love to figure out, I mean, I know that Trustee Ketchmark mentioned it hasn't been figured out yet. It still isn't figured out, and potentially we have 3 or 4 more years to figure it out. But it does feel like the best choice with an additional crossing or like a pedestrian crossing to the, to get back across if you wanted to at some point in the middle by McCormick or by Brookfield Woods. But I know that's not the most expensive part by any means. But I'd love to see a more like marked crossing with the option one if we went that route for people to get over to the zoo parking lot if the bike parking is on the north side of the street. I don't have any good funding solutions right now. And I agree that Brookfield's ends at that Gulfview stoplight, I think. And then from there to First Avenue is not Brookfield anymore, correct? So it feels like that whole route makes sense, but that there should be some funding partners that we need to work out.
And Trustee Ketchmark, if I can, just to piggyback onto your discussion, you may remember when I first got involved with this project was after that first study was done by CMAP, and we had the mayors from Riverside and North Riverside in there, and I remember, if I remember correctly, the mayor from North Riverside was not interested in funding this, and partly because Brookfield wasn't interested in funding First Avenue, right? So I'm not sure we'll get them as a partner. I think the county is a possibility. We have really explored that on the phone calls. What you're discussing, staff has presented, and they haven't bent off of their policy, but that doesn't mean that's the end of negotiations. So
Is there a distinction between the county and the Cook County Forest Preserve District in terms of who we're talking about getting funding from, or are they one and the same? I mean,
I think
I know technically they're two separate bodies in a way, but I mean, again, I guess maybe that's something we have to talk about here, but.
I think the Forest Preserve District is part of the county.
Right.
So if we can talk to our commissioner, I think he can lobby and help provide us some help with the Forest Preserve District.
And Derek, I mean, the point you brought up was the point I was making then. The push by North Riverside was for that small segment of 26th to 31st. That was the smallest segment of all this. I think they said there was 26 kids that would possibly use that route to RB. And they were asking for our participation in that. And at that time, I felt that it wasn't our role to participate in that unless we had bigger discussion on the whole project.
Right.
Because this is the biggest segment of it. You know, we're gonna share on the cost for the smallest segment that benefits only their residents there, really, but not have any discussion on this. And that's where we're at now. So I don't see how they would necessarily want to participate, and I understand that. But I go back to, it's a regional project. Brookfield is part of a region. This is not our connectivity project on our own. You know, and again, there's a lot of federal funding, but where's the county on it? And the zoo obviously benefits from this tremendously. You know, zoo is part of the county, but there should be funding as part of that as well.
Well, that goes back to President Garvey saying that we should engage our county commissioner, who we see all the time.
We should, but we're at the
That's what
point where we
should be
have to
doing.
make some decisions on things now, where we're actually getting, you know, to that point, talking about this. That part of it has been going on for 10 years.
Is
You
there
know-
a way to provide that policy direction from the board contingent on certain funding opportunities or certain?
Well, I mean, Derek, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, if, let's say there's some consensus on the board to move forward with one of these options. I mean, we're not signing paperwork and committing to spending $1.7 million tonight.
No, we're not. We, what we commit to, if we make the decision tonight, is directing Ciorba what portions of the path to study. And I'm hearing some comments that maybe that there's stronger interest in the full length. You can study the full length, and we can pursue funding at the same time. And if we're not able to get, for instance, Cook County to participate in the funding, then that can be a justifiable reason why we, at a later date, would reduce the limits of the path.
Because, I mean, I know this board understands this. We can make decisions tonight, make recommendations, but it'll be a future board that is going to be required to spend the money or sign an agreement to spend money, so.
Derek, with option one, how do you get to the portion of the bike trail that's down, you know, through the parking lot there, down McCormick, I guess it would be? Is there a crossing from the south side to get across, or
Currently not, and again, the
as
forest.
part of the design? I mean,
Part of the study, right, what's being proposed tonight, currently not. The Forest Preserve was against the mid-block crossing, so how would you get to the Salt Creek Trail north by Cantata? You'd go all the way down to First Avenue, north on First to 26th Street, and then west on 26th.
but isn't that a little ironic? I mean, they want this to be a connector program, but we're not connecting to the trail there? Really?
Well, you are, there's a signalized intersection.
Well, yeah, if you go, you know, you go, what would be 2 blocks down or whatever to get to it and come back.
Right. From my personal view, when you're on a bike, you don't mind going a little bit further out of your way versus walking. We do have the pretty good access to the First Avenue Trail on Washington right now, so.
What I would also share is the zoo's been part of these discussions. I mean, you have the zoo, you have Cook County Forest Preserve, you have Cook County Highway Department, we have IDOT, which starts getting into why is this taking so long? I sympathize and agree with you completely. The zoo has said if we go with option one, we put the trail on the south side, they will work to develop a better bike access than on the south side. So in some respects, it'd be moved from where it is now. They'd move, or maybe they'd keep that there, but they'd add some kind of area where it would make sense to leave the trail, go south, have a bike rack area, then come into the zoo.
Wasn't it not that long ago that I thought their preferred idea was that it crossed over to the north side at some point because they were losing too much of their,
Well, welcome to our world. They've said both things. At first, when I first started getting involved in this project, the zoo's concern on the south side was you're too close to the pachyderms and the exhibits that back up to 31st Street. So they wanted it on the north side. So we were the proponents of the north side. More recently, however, the zoo has had a change in philosophy, and they support the south side. Actually, I think they're kind of ambivalent. I think they'll go with either one. It's up to you, whatever the village wants. So it's gone back and forth a bit. So that's been sort of some of the delays as well, that we keep getting counter direction. But this zoo's been cooperative with us, and they said on the south side, if it does stay on the south side, they will work to develop better bike access.
And I just want to caution, and Chris brought up a good point, and Trustee Cortez, let's not just call it a bike path. It's it's a pedestrian path, it's a baby stroller path, it's a walking path. So, I mean, I think that's an important part to remember in terms of what our plans are. And again, the point I was making earlier, I just want to make sure everyone understands what the direction we give tonight, if we give direction tonight, is going to, we're not authorized and we're not spending money. We're saying we prefer this route and going forward, but it's going to be a future board. Many of us might not be sitting up here when the decision comes to sign an agreement to expend money. So it's a challenging view for the board, not knowing how the negotiations could go on cost sharing and grant opportunities. But we're going to continue to do what we've always done, is try and work with the county and work with other municipalities and, approach North Riverside, approach Riverside. Trustee Ketchmark is 100% right. When he was village president, he set it down very well. This is a regional project. This shouldn't just be ours, but, we've been entrusted with this kind of in our laps. If we don't do something, this isn't going to happen. I think we got to find a way to try and work through it and build a consensus and build some funding opportunities, so.
The project had stalled for a while, a few years ago, and then we issued the addendum to move forward. Wasn't part of that some work that had to be done on First and Ogden? There was a holdup over there with what was happening on the Lions end of it?
There is, just contacting and working with Lion staff and getting recommendations like this has been a bit of a challenge for the consultant.
But that's not playing into this or keeping any of it moving forward?
No, this seems to be the big holdup, and again, for this section of the path at least. If I could, I'll offer, from what I'm hearing from the board, possible direction would be for staff, if we prefer to the Prairie to First Avenue, south side, with the understanding that additional funding will be explored and pursued. Maybe we take a couple months, 3 months, and go pursue this with Cook County, that the board had concerns with the total costs. We want to approach you again with a request for some cost sharing, and maybe we can approach our county commissioner too. And then we can come back to the board with results after we've had some of those discussions.
Can we, if we're going to do that, though, touch back to Trustee Ketchmark, I almost called you President Ketchmark. Trustee Ketchmark's, this is still not connecting to the Salt Creek Trail at that point, so you would still want a crossing at, was it McCormick? Or either there or just prior where the parking lot is, some kind of cross section, just like we do in.
We can
Yeah.
ask the Orbit to add the crossing. It probably makes sense at McCormick at that point.
Yeah.
The reason was, yes.
And even beyond approaching the county, I would like to talk to Riverside and North Riverside, and Berwyn even. It is a regional project. I hear all the time about how people would like different ways to get to the zoo, and they can get to Brookfield too. They can get all the way through to, Prairie and visit our fine village if they wanted to come from Riverside, North Riverside on bikes and pedestrians and things like that, so.
Certainly, I think that we should be talking in Riverside about the portion of the trail that is theirs.
Right. So east of, right.
East of
Monroe
Gulf.
Avenue.
Right.
And even if North Riverside is not excited about helping to fund it, they may be willing to work with the county to help with negotiations to reduce the costs of some of those tree removals.
Yeah. And yes, agreed. We have certainly explored that and been shot down, but there are other people in the room that may have more luck than staff has. To round out the picture, there is on First Avenue portion of the path, most of the path from Parkview going south to Ogden is within the village of Riverside. And Brookfield is not looking at cost sharing there, so just as we negotiate, keep that in mind, like we're not looking at cost sharing for the portion of the path that's within the village of Lyons either. So it's regional, that could be a different approach. what everyone anticipates at county level and us is that this goes forward. These paths, there's some property issues over in Lyons. When they took that dam down, there's some new land created. That means the river filled in, and they're having trouble finding out ownership, and that's where they want to put this path. We don't necessarily want to be tied to that First Avenue and Ogden path with our project in design and in construction, because they may run into significant delays. So everyone's anticipating that when Phase 2 engineering, design, and construction happen, that they'll probably split the 31st Street path off. Doesn't mean that we couldn't get assistance with funding, but it's probably not being bid all as at one path is the anticipation.
So Derek, just to confirm that, yeah, I think there's going to be lengthy delays with the Lions portion of the path for the reasons Derek just said. I think if we're 3 years away, that might be 6 years away from coming to agreement. You think if that's still in limbo down south, and if the board, and we get funding from whomever, that they'll move forward just with this segment, and then while they still pursue the other issues on lines?
Yes, and for clarification, the Phase 1 links all these paths together, the Phase 1 report. We have to complete that all together. But then after that, you can split up Phase 2 and Phase 3. So you can look at those as individual projects. And that's not uncommon. I mean, Grand Boulevard is one Phase 1, but we did it in 2 construction projects. So even within our village, we've done that.
So what's the consensus of the board? Which option do you want staff to go back to them with and say, this is our preferred option, with the clarification that we're not agreeing to pay for the whole thing, but this is the preferred option? I've heard several people say option 1. Is there any other option that the board wants staff to go forward with?
Nope. not me.
Okay. I think the direction is pretty clear. I mean, we favor it from a logistics standpoint and a policy standpoint. From a financial standpoint, by no means are we agreeing that we should have to pay such a large portion of ourselves, and we'll work together with our other fine elected officials to come up with ways to mitigate the village's portion. Okay. Is that all you need for now?
Okay, yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for bringing it forward. Thank you to everyone who's been involved in this. It's been a long process, and it's going to be a long process, but someday it'll be done, and we'll all ride and walk it together. Okay, moving on to the next item. Trustee Ketchmark teased this a little bit. We're going to be talking about a temporary retail incubator program. The Brookfield Economic Development Commission had a very exciting conversation about this. Libby Popovic, our Economic Development Coordinator, gave us a very good detailed memo on this, but I'm going to ask Libby to make a presentation to the board and the audience about what we're talking about here. So, Libby, thank you.
Oh, thank you. So as you've heard, we're very excited for this opportunity to bring these small retail shops into the village of Brookfield. They mirror some of the other small retail incubator programs that have been started in Batavia, in Berwyn, in McCook, and now we have an opportunity to bring it here in Brookfield. We've taken it to the EDC several times, and with some of the guidance with Trustee Ketchmark on there and the other commissioners, we've been able to narrow it down to a particular site, as well as iron out some of the details on it. So as you can tell, we'll go back to the first one. The Brookfield shops, we have narrowed down, they're going to be small sheds that encompass small retail incubator programs. The site that we're looking at is Progress Park, which would be leased to Brookfield by the Bank of Brookfield, First National Bank of Brookfield, for a nominal fee. They're willing to do a 3-year lease. On that site, and you can go to the next site, this is a small proposed site plan that needs to be flushed out, but from what we can tell, we could fit comfortably 6 sheds that would be about 15 by 15.
And Libby, the
Yes.
tree is not there. We were talking about the tree.
Oh, I
If
know,
the commission-
they wanted to remove the tree.
It-
You're
it's
right,
not-
it's
it's
not
gone.
there.
Already done.
Right. We're already ahead. So we might be able to fit a 7th in there. That's where we're going to kind of go to Derek, ask some advice, go to anyone else who can help us out structure this. The plan was to put these sheds facing outward. They could also face inward, so we can have a small courtyard on there. Progress Park is a perfect location because there's a lot of traffic that goes through. There's a lot of small businesses. It fits in right with the entire vision of that. So if we go to the next slide, we've broken it down into 3 phases, and these will need to be fleshed out a little more, but we have kind of a quick timeline for this, for being able to bring these shops up and operating within the next calendar year. So the first phase is October, November, and then we do have January, February, but it's to finalize the site location. So the proposal from the EDC is Progress Park, because that is available to us. It's already been reviewed by the EDC. We'd like to finalize the project budget. The projected budget that we have right now is $85,000. That does not include any additional sponsorships or vendors that might contribute to this. And one of our commissioners with the Bank of Brookfield has indicated that the bank would be willing to sponsor at least one of these sheds. So we'd like to ideally get at least 2 sponsors for the sheds. That would increase our budget and allow us to do some of the additional landscaping and other items that we need on there. We'd like to start the construction phase between now and January on that site so we can have everything prepped and ready. And we'll obviously finalize the lease with the Bank of Brookfield. So if you go to the next slide, we need to launch the marketing campaign. As part of this retail program, Incubator program, it does include workshops and an educational component to that. So we want to open it up for open enrollment so people can apply to be part of, to be part of the shops. And then we would have a jury selection for who actually gets picked for that. We're mirroring this based on Berwyn's shops that they have. Those are much bigger, but this is a smaller incubator program. So we'll have to host some informational workshops on what is this program, how would it work, put together our outline, put together the binder. Those are all doable things, and then select a jury. The recommendation is that the jury would be selected from members of the community, not including any staff, not including any commissioners or trustees, just directly from the community so they can pick the next cohorts that would be part of this incubator program. So then we will move into phase 2. That would be roughly February through April, holding the jury selection, which would be held here or at the library, so we can pick our next cohorts for this project. And these would rotate every season, so every year basically. From June through December, there would be a new group of cohorts, which would open it up to additional businesses and small vendors that might be opening up or bringing their businesses here to Brookfield. We'd begin the vendor training in the classes, and that would entail everything from walking them through how to physically put together their site to what is a business plan, how do they account for their overhead, CAM charges, and so forth. Installing utilities, completing the landscaping, and addressing any troubleshooting. We need a few months to do that. We're already in the talks with ComEd to see what we need to bring in electricity to the site. It would not have any water at this time. We can certainly add that later on, but right now it wouldn't. We also have permission from Compassion Factory, a verbal permission that we could use their building to install the box for the electricity. And then we would customize individual shop decorations, either by giving the shop owners a small stipend to help them out or giving them specific directions, because this is intended to be very uniform and run like a whole program. After that, we'll go to the next slide, which is completing the process, completing these vendor shops, troubleshooting any of them, having them bring in their products, having a progress report as to where we're at, and then hopefully we're up and running. We were going to have June 1st. We might still be able to meet that, but be a little realistic, June 15th through about December 15th, and the shops would be open for business every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, roughly from the hours of 10 to 5. Those are adjustable as well as we figure out what works best. And in the middle, we'd have performance evaluation of the vendors, how their business is doing, rate of return, and so forth. So they would each receive a report card as we go through this. So it's really intended to be an incubator program to help small businesses and entrepreneurs with their business to try it out, test it out in a small brick and mortar, and then make the decision, do they want to expand that? And last slide, we get to our projected budget. The biggest cost is going to be the first, we've got three parts. The first is the initial build-out and the construction cost. Physical land, we'll probably be able to lease that for about $1 for the 3 years, so that's very nominal. The actual storefronts themselves, the recommended model are the tough sheds that are a little costlier, but they will stand the test of time. And then doing the aesthetics and the build-outs, if we add additional windows or doors to that, or planters, the cost is roughly 12 to 15 per unit. It could be a little higher, it could be a little bit lower, but that's a projected budget we're trying to stay under. Program promotion, we've got the educational component of it. Once that's set up, that number will likely go down, but promoting it, putting it on the website, putting it on all the socials, printing the materials, getting it out to the public, and the initial campaign for it. And then the ongoing support and sustainability, we're estimating 3 to 6. That would include on-site maintenance, staff time, any repairs, anything that, we need to work through, continued marketing on it, and then workshops and classes. So the initial year of setting that up will be kind of the bigger amount. We estimate for the next year, it'll be mostly in the third column for maintenance on that. And we estimate that would be between roughly $8,000 to $10,000 to run it. Any questions?
Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I love this idea. I was telling Dr. Popovic that I was in Michigan this weekend, and I saw, and I haven't been to the Berwyn shops yet, so, but I got to see their version. It was really, they weren't open, unfortunately, but I did get to see how they had it set up, and so I'm really excited. I have a few questions. Who do you envision doing the educational piece? Is that staff, or are you going to hire people to do that?
Eventually, we would like to hire someone. That really depends on the budget. At this point, it would be staff. We're kind of getting the workbook on how this is going to be put together from Berwyn with all the educational materials and all the items that we'd need to get it set up. I have also reached out to the Chamber of Commerce. That's given its blessing. They're very excited about this as well. So there's some possibility of collaborating with them to work on this. The first year will be a trial run to see.
So that actually segues to my next question, which is how transferable are these units? Are they, if you decide that it goes really well and you want to move it somewhere where you can add more units, can you just pick up and move these units somewhere else, or?
That's the best part about it, because they are all completely transferable. And as part of our lease, we would have to agree that once we move it, we'd replace everything that was there. We could move it to a bigger site if, say, we wanted to have 12 units or 15 units. Or if there's an open site that opens up here in the village where we could actually accommodate additional units. So it allows for growth and scalability.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Also, do remember the business tenants pay rent on this. I think you mentioned it was $500 a month.
Yes, thank you for reminding me. So yes, this is intended to run like a small business. The proposed amount would be $500 a month, plus the CAM charges, which we would then calculate. I believe in the Berwyn shops, those are around $250. It might be a little less since this is a smaller space here. So yearly, we would receive the rent per cohort for their space, which would roughly be about $18,000 of rent, which we then can roll into the following year. So it's intended to be sustainable for a minimum of at least 3 years, if not longer.
And there is a sales tax aspect to it,
Yes, we would
too.
have the sales tax aspect too.
I had a couple questions about this site location and how this site was determined. And was there any discussion about how this could fit into the Energize Ogden plan and the sites on Ogden that the village already owns, and having a little more space there?
You mean on Ogden Avenue?
Yes.
Ogden Avenue itself was kind of summarily rejected just because it's such a high-traffic area for something like this, and we don't have a dedicated spot for it. The initial site that was planned for this would be here at the village of Brookfield, right along Salt Creek, because we could fit more of the cubicles or the sheds there. We could probably fit about 8 to 9 sheds there.
You mean the parking lot?
Right, on the parking lot. Well, on the grass, actually. So it would be like a U shape, and it would work in conjunction with the farmer's market, except 3 days a week. We would also have access to the bathrooms here, which is another cost component to think about. After the commissioners thought about it, they thought maybe 8 Corners would work a little bit better. So that's how Progress Park came about as another location.
Well, Trustee Cote does have a question about potties, similar to our previous questions about that.
You know, I always ask about the potty. So where would they be going potty? I mean, we're not going to put, you know, porta potties in the middle of all this, are we?
Well, we may have to be a little creative with that. It really depends. If we were going to have it here at Village Hall, we would have access to the restrooms, and that was why staff initially recommended this site, because from a very functional logistical standpoint, it's much easier to manage it here, especially since staff is going to be doing that. If it's at Progress Park, we have reached out to the owner of Compassion Factory to see would we be able to have some access to the restrooms, and that would only be for the actual cohorts, not for the public. We've also looked into the option, like Berwyn Shops have, getting an ADA accessible porta potty and then decorating it, putting something in front of it, and strategically placing it so it's,
Well, yeah, the placement is what I'm,
Right.
you don't want a porta potty right in the middle of a.
right, we're gonna need some
Corners.
design help with that. But that is definitely something to think about, which is why the initial place that we were thinking of was to have it here, because everything's contained right here, and that would be one less cost for it.
I'm still, I mean, I don't want to disregard, I'd love to hear what the EDC had to say about that, but having access to water or something feels like this would be a better place to have those different amenities than trying to add those utilities and
Right.
trying to add that to the site by Progress Park, but I get that that's a more walkable and more visible area. It just seems like
Right.
it lends itself to not quite have as much help right away if someone needed something. It's also right by the police department. It's right by lots of things. And so if there was assistance needed or be able to watch over that space
Yes,
when they're
safety is a
locked.
big issue, and that was why the recommendation initially was to have it here, because it is self-contained. We have a little more space, you know, it's easy to bring, if we did want to bring water to it, and electricity, and we have access to the bathrooms. That being said, it's not carved in stone. This is one location that we could have it at. It's a doable location too, since we wouldn't have water there, it would just be the electricity.
One of the challenges of having it here on this campus is obviously the farmer's market.
Sure.
And they utilize, that grass area is utilized by, you know, patrons, they have music out there, they have picnic tables, it's a very busy, plus there's tents all along the parking lot that would have to be, I'm not sure how logistically we can make that work here. And that was-
I think you have a big advantage in having it in a business district as well, because not only will people be able to move from the business district into these incubator shops, but it could be a draw that could bring other people to the Eight Corners district. So I think that I'm leaning towards not having it at Village Hall. It's just too separate from the business districts that I think that we could be helping with this.
And at Progress Park, the goal would be then, the shop owners, if their business seems to be successful, they can then move into a brick and mortar, and there's a few spaces that are available right there on Broadway. So that was kind of the other consideration that EDC had.
And I think the visibility of this area is something the commission talked about, as well as you're taking an underutilized piece of property. I mean, it's a very strange shape to it, whatever. I mean, there was a bank there at one time. But taking that and putting in a business community, bringing more attention to the Eight Corners district was kind of what led into their discussion on that. In terms of the water and that, we talked about that, and I think in Berwyn as well, there isn't water for each unit. There isn't heat in the units. There's electricity provided, and I think they're bringing in their own water if they need it for whatever.
Right, and then little heaters.
Yeah. We did talk about, you know, the possibility of the porta potty in the middle section of this. Don't know how accessible that would be to, you know, change that out. But there is a whole middle to this. But the visibility, you know, up at the circle is much greater than it would be here.
Other,
Is the idea to have them facing outward just for visibility purposes?
It was, you get greater visibility as the cars are driving around and from the other businesses. We did talk about having them face inward and then being able to have events in the center. Having them face out doesn't preclude events in the center either. It really it depends on our creativity and our budget. We can do something in the center, whether they face in or out. If they're facing out, though, we do have to think about the security, so the type of door that we get on it might be a little bit different.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
right,
feels-
and we do need the ADA access.
It feels like facing in would create a more sense of community, like amongst themselves as well. I still think you could decorate the other side to make it not look like it has its back to the street. But, you know, otherwise they're not facing each other or talking to each other all day either.
Right. Well, part of it is that it is this kind of cohort group, so they do work together, and sometimes they oversee each other's shops. So the one detriment to having them face out is if they have to run to the bathroom or do anything, or if kids are running around, all of that needs to be, you know, tightened up. But if they're facing inward, the recommendation from the group that set up the Berwyn shops was to face them inward, because then you do have that sense of community, as you
Right.
noted. But either one is doable. It's great visibility there and lots of creativity with it. And they could be moved, too. They don't necessarily have to be the way they're positioned right there.
I think also as a customer, just walking on the interior rather than, you know, having cars driving by, you know, I think it's maybe a little nicer. I would vote for.
But Tim, did I hear you
Everything
raise the
inside.
point about handicap accessibility? I mean, is it,
Yeah, one of the things that we talked about was, access up right off of a concrete sidewalk into the units is more accessible than if we did the inward facing, we're hoping not to have to construct and put in concrete, because we only have a 3-year lease. And so that's an expensive proposition for a finite period of time. So we were thinking using the existing access points along the 2 sidewalks would make it much easier and cheaper. And if it really takes off, and if we ever want to do the opposite, as Libya said, we could turn around and install some type of.
and I think that's, it's, when these things take off, I know it's going to take off, so I think we, look at this as an initial investment, and the fact that they're movable, and I see us needing a bigger site in the future. I think this is going to be so big, but this is the place where we'll say it got started, so I think we should look at the first year as, okay, let's get this in a way that, can work, and then know that we're probably going to have to move to a bigger site or make permanent improvements to the land to do it. So I don't know that this board needs to get into the final details of which way they face, but I mean, what I'm hearing is tremendous support from the board for the idea. And I thank Brookfield Bank for the generous, as always, such a strong support of the community. The land is the big thing. I mean, I agree with Trustee Ketchmark that I think this is the ideal spot for it, the visibility. You have the bus route and everything down Washington Avenue, you have traffic, you have, just some of the businesses that are along there now, along Broadway and the other things that are happening there. I think you'll get the foot traffic and people walking there. There's the school, parents dropping their kids off at school and everything else. I think there's a natural foot traffic element for this. But what I'm hearing from the board, there's a clear consensus to kind of move forward with this, which I know how much work has gone into this. When I first heard about the idea, I loved it, and I'm glad that the EDC and staff has been able to move it forward. And I know it's a very ambitious timetable, because you guys have a lot going on, and holidays and everything else and all the other things that we put on your plate, but I love the aggressive schedule to try and get it up and running for, that very time. If you get it up to by June 15th, that'd be great. If you get it June 1st, even better, but I think there's a clear consensus from the board to move forward with this.
Yes.
All right,
Wonderful.
thank you. So you're just going to stay in that spot and talk about the next item, consideration discussion of a village ordinance concerning mobile food vendors. It was last February that we passed some initial regulations. We had the conversation about food trucks, and it was kind of a new move for the village, and we created a system for allowing food trucks in the village. And as I think we predicted at the time, we indicated we might have to revisit it. It's time to revisit it due to certain circumstances that have come up. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Libby to present on this topic.
Right, so in February of 2023, the mobile food vendor license was implemented in the ordinance. And since then, we've had an increase in some of the mobile food vendors. At that time, and right now, there's no limitation for parking where the mobile food vendors can park at this time. So as staff reviewed the reports and reviewed the ordinance, we thought this might be an appropriate time, about a year and a half into it, to review and see if the board would be interested in placing some limitations on that. You can go to the next slide. And we recommend 100 feet seems to be the average of what some of the other municipalities have. It can certainly be less, it can certainly be more, but that seems the most appropriate that other municipalities such as Cicero, Oak Park, Aurora, Downers Grove, Schaumburg, to name a few that have these. And that would limit mobile food vendors from parking in front of brick and mortar places that have the same type of business. Or it could also limit them to parking in a specific area in the city. So I wanted to bring that to the board for further discussion.
Thank you. I mean, and the 100 feet, it's, 100 feet of a brick and mortar. I mean, I think we need to define it as, brick and mortar or food service establishment, that type of thing, in a legal parking space, which is, things that I know we talked about before. And I do remember when I think we thought about adding this back in February last year, and we wanted to see how it worked. But I think, we've had scenarios where this has come up and come into play, and we want to support the food truck vendors. They do provide a service. They've been very popular, but we also want to support the brick and mortar businesses, restaurants, and things that opened. So, thoughts from the board?
I agree that it makes sense to add the limit. I'm wondering if if the concern is like during larger events or when we're trying to have a lot of extra food vendors at something, like if there's something that we can put in place, like except for events when we're trying to get more food. I'm not sure how you would word that, but
You can have an exception for special events. For example, like Chicago Grid or Music on Grand, there can be exceptions that are written into it if you're inclined.
maybe it's not right in front, but 100 feet might put them out
Too
way
far.
too far for that to make sense.
But if they were village-run events, I mean, do we need an exception put in there? I mean, if we're contracting or permitting them, or, I'm not sure how that would work. That's a good point. Like, for instance, with the bike race this year, we did move them to this, Grand and Prairie area to be more accessible in terms of the bike race and the flow and everything else like this, but.
But even over there, that was pretty far away from the other restaurants in that area.
Do we have anything in the ordinance already that allows for staff discretion in those cases?
Not to my knowledge. I would have to go back and look, but I don't think so.
There is no real regulation.
There is no.
Anything goes now, so there's really nothing to be enforced except that they have to have, I think, a
They have
license.
to have a license, and they did for that event as well.
And I just want to point out, I know 100 feet sounds very far, but that's like 2 lots. It's like the theater building is 50 feet wide. So you put 2 of those together, and that's how far away we're talking. So it's not that difficult, I don't think, or that far.
I don't mind adding in an exception for special events at village discretion.
But everyone agree with the 100 feet is and again, we talked about this last year and we didn't put anything now, and we can revisit it. We'll see how if the board is comfortable with the 100 feet, we'll put in the 100 feet and see how it goes.
How would that go into effect? Would it be after when they're renewing their business license, or would it go into effect immediately?
I would think it would go into effect after they start renewing the business licenses, and those we're sending out the renewal notices next month, pretty soon. So I would think that would go into effect for 2025 to give everyone enough notice of that.
Do you need enough notice when it's a mobile? Not to sound crazy, but it's already mobile. So why does it have to get months' notice? And if they want to set up a mobile burger joint, we don't want them parking in front of Burger Antics, and they shouldn't have to wait till 2025 to do so. They should, how
That's
much
a
of a
fair point.
notification? They're mobile.
We don't have,
Right.
if the board is inclined, we don't need to provide the notice.
How many holders do we have right now, like mobile food vendor?
We only have about 12.
Okay.
So it's not a huge problem right now, but it could certainly grow because we've been getting more inquiries about it. And certainly as summer approaches and spring approaches, we'll definitely get more licenses then.
Right, but I mean, in terms of like, so if we, the next village board meeting is November 11th, if we took action and passed something at November 11th meeting and made it effective immediately, would, I mean, notify the 12 holders that currently have it that this is the new regulation, and it'll be that way going forward? Is that the board's thought? or-
You're rapidly getting to the end of the season, though, too, so I don't think you can expect to see the food vendors out there much more than the next month.
Then I'd still say, as soon as it passed, it's effective immediately.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, in terms of the exception, even for special events, I'd like to see us not bring in food trucks and put them right in front of our restaurants. You know, I mean, how we did with the bike race, it was off to the side, that's fine, but we should be supporting our permanent, full-time businesses. So if there are food trucks, I mean, there's a place for them, but certainly it shouldn't be right in front of our existing food businesses, restaurant businesses. We got to figure out how to get them to the concerts, to get food vendors at the, at the concerts.
So clear consensus, pass get a proposed ordinance that has a 100-foot regulation effective immediately. I mean, to trustee Ketchum, I mean, you know, when the thought of special events came up, I anticipated that it was just village-run special events. If we had a special event, you know, we would obviously plan and where they would be located and stuff. And as trustee Ketchmark indicated, we wouldn't want to, I don't see a scenario where we would put them within 100 feet of a restaurant at that point, so.
Right, and for many of our special events, the street's closed anyway, like the bike race, concerts on Grand.
Right.
The concerts at Kiwanis aren't by a brick and mortar, so most of our special events, the 100 feet doesn't even enter into the equation, but
Okay.
maybe the car show.
All right, we have time to get that up on November 11th?
We can.
Thank you so much, Libby, appreciate it. Okay. Moving on to the next item is a discussion of the 2025 IEPA project plan discussion for the water system and our capital plan. So Derek, you're back in the hot seat.
Righty. Good evening. So just a little summary. Back in September of 2024, we presented a engineering agreement for preparing an IEPA project plan. Tonight, we're here to outline the projects that we want to include in the project plan. Been meeting with DPW to develop those projects. And at the end, we're just looking simply for concurrence from the village board to include these projects in the project plan. And we would intend to submit in November this year to the IEPA. So quick overview, village board passed a water rate increase in '21 to fund water main replacement. And as we all know, we followed up in 2022 with another water rate increase to fund lead water service replacement. We did prepare a project plan in '22 to qualify the following projects for the EPA loan funding. We had a water main replacement project that included 15,000 feet of water main replacement. And we also qualified approximately 2/3 of the village for lead water service replacement in that project plan. The board's aware, we've had good fortune and obtained quite a few loans for water main replacement and lead water service replacement. We've obtained $10.3 million and have replaced all of those water mains, or will be replacing all of those water mains that were included in that 2022 project plan. We've also obtained $17.5 million for lead service replacement. It's a little over 1,300 lead services that we'll be replacing between 24 and 25 projects. Now it's time, we want to add, when we pass that water main replacement, we knew the first project plan wasn't all-encompassing, so it's time to prepare a new project plan that qualifies additional water main replacement. And the other thing we want to do is get the entire village qualified for lead water service replacement. So objective, I think I covered this, is provide update on the current projects, and then again, we'll present the approach to the future water main and lead service projects. I'm going to treat these individually. We'll start with the water main replacement, and then we'll transition on to the lead service replacement. So that water rate adjustment that was adopted in 2021 generates about $1.18 million per year for water main replacement. With the 1.9% interest rate, which is approximately what we're getting from the EPA, we can fund up to $27 million in water main replacement. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've had two projects. We had the 2024 water main replacement project, replacing about 6,500 feet of water main, little over $5 million. That construction's been going on this summer and be substantially complete by the end of the year. Second project is the 25 water main replacement project. Just received good news a week or two ago from the EPA. We received the bypass. They approved us for bypass funding, so we are going to get that funding for next year. That project includes about 7,300 foot of water main replacement.
Derek, can you explain what that bypass funding is and how we got it, please?
Happy to. So when we apply for our projects, each March, we submit what's known as a funding nomination form. The IEPA receives them from all the municipalities in the state, and they score them. Our water main replacement projects don't typically score high enough to make what they call the intended funding list. So they run out of funding before getting down to our projects. What we can do, though, is there are a number of those projects on the intended funding list that, for one reason or another, a lot of times they don't have the engineering completed, or the company or the community can't fund it. They end up turning down the funding, and then the IEPA opens that up to bypass funding. Bypass funding is first come, first served. So they they provided their list, and EPA provided their list of projects in July. In August, we submitted all the plans, specifications, and staff worked with us on the funding applications, and they've approved all that. So we were very early in the process, and they told us they weren't going to announce till January, but we, again, earlier this month got news that we are going to get the bypass funding this year. That'll probably be our practice and process going forward, is to continue to, we won't score high, but we'll be first in line to get that bypass funding. While there's not a guarantee, this is the second, they have every year had bypass funding. This is the second year in a row we're getting it. So thank you. Getting back to the 25 water main replacement, 7,300 foot of water main, $5.2 million loan. Construction will start early next spring, be done by the end of the year. So where does that leave us? Again, I mentioned that our rate increase fund can fund $27 million. We've had about $10.3 million that's obligated between 24 and 25 projects. That leaves us with $16.7 million in additional loan funding, and that's our idea with the project plan, is we'll put together enough projects to expend the remaining funding that first rate increase could spend. So approximately 20,000 feet of more water main that we can replace with that. I did want to touch base on the EPA loan application process. It's really a two-step process. The project plan it's a list of projects. It's your 5-year capital improvements program. It doesn't mean you're going to apply for all that funding, but you're limited to submitting applications to whatever's in that project plan. So my point being was we've met with Vince and DPW. We want to be conservative. We're actually going to apply for more than we can expend in this project plan. And then each year we'll go ahead and submit funding nomination forms for exactly the projects that we are applying for funding for. And just so we're comfortable, I'm throwing around big numbers like 20 million. We're actually going to include 25 million. There's zero obligation on the village board, on the village's part, to apply for these. We're just getting them qualified so we can apply for those projects. Next slide. So again, meeting with DPW, some of the criteria we use to select water main replacement. Of course, we look at our history of water main breaks and the condition of the main that's observed when they repair the water main breaks. We also look to coordinate with future capital improvements, particularly our street improvements and our collector route improvements. If we have water main replacements scheduled for streets to be improved in the near future, we want to get those done ahead of time, or worst case, at the same year the street's done. We don't want to come in with water improvements after the street's been improved. And another one that's a little new to this application is meeting with Vince and the water department is, we have about 20 sections of street that include, that have 2 water mains out there. And how that happened, they had the original 6-inch water main with the water services, and over the years, Brookfield has put in a number of booster mains. Those are larger mains that bring additional water volume to other areas of the village. When those booster mains were put in, the water services were not transferred from the 6 over to the 12. The 6 was still functioning. They were left on there, and it was due to mainly to cost considerations and not do it at this time. But we are maintaining 2 water mains. Those 6-inch water mains are the original mains put in when the homes and subdivisions were developed. So we have a number of, in addition to the water main replacements, we have a number where we want to abandon the 6-inch main. We'll transfer all the water services to the 12-inch main, and that'll allow us to abandon that old 6-inch main, which is, when we pass this water rate increase, the part of the idea was to get rid of as much of that 100-year-old plus main, so. So in summary, what we're proposing is to include in the project plan 32,000 feet of water main replacement, approximate estimate of 25 million. Again, I mentioned that exceeds our budgeting, but that's purposeful. We do have a map. I know it's hard to view. It's in the packet. It's online, but we did highlight where we've selected the water mains to be replaced, and in tan or brownish color, those are the streets that have 2 water mains. We're proposing to abandon the old 6-inch water main on those streets. I can pause here. We'll go into lead services next, but if there's any questions on the water main replacement, I can pause.
Board, have any questions about the water main replacement? Vince, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, we've replaced quite a few water mains. Is it helping with the reduction in the number of surprise breaks or breaks? I know, at least in one spot, it didn't work.
Yeah, well, currently, we did a bunch of improvements on the 16-inch water main that runs along Brookfield Avenue here. So the changing of those hydraulics a little bit, we did see an influx of water main breaks. So we're wrapping up this year's, they have subsided though, so we're getting back to normal. We have seen an influx of water main breaks, but it's balanced out, and I do think it's going to help improve us in the future.
That's not the answer, is it?
No, when I asked the question, I know what happens when you replace one part, the pressure increases, and then farther down the line, but the alternative is don't fix them, and then they'll just break everywhere, so.
Oh, absolutely. So, yeah, as we change the hydraulics in the system is so old that there were pressure spikes that were introduced into the distribution system, and that did create, it exposed parts of water main where the integrity was not as strong and exposed, so we did see an influx. I think about roughly 10 water main breaks in a short period of time.
Right.
But that's balanced itself out, and the new water main will improve and will reduce the number of water main breaks moving forward.
At least we try and schedule them when they're more convenient in the nice weather. I was kind enough to have one on my block on a nice warm day as opposed to in the middle of the night, so.
The weather has been on our side.
All right, thank you, Vince.
Derek, could you, looking at the map, could you talk a little bit about abandoning the existing water mains? So looking at the map, those are ones all to abandon or that have been abandoned?
Those are proposed to be abandoned.
So, I mean, the map we have in our packet, it shows an awful lot of them. So you mentioned that at some point another main was put in there, but the water service isn't hooked up to that new main? So for
Correct.
these ones that are to be abandoned, we need to hook up all the service to the new main.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And what is the time frame for abandoning these?
That'll be determined, so this is a project plan, and then within the next 5 years, and again, we're not
Okay.
saying we'll get to all of these, but within the next 5 years, we would start undertaking these projects. We'll prioritize within this group of projects, we'll prioritize which water main replacements, and we haven't done that yet. That's part of the funding nomination form that'll come next.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions on the water main issue before we move on to lead service? Okay, thank you, Derek.
Sure. I'll add a quick one too to Vince's comment and your comment, President Garvey, is we're not the only village that's having increased water main breaks. We have others that are going just through the lead water service replacement. What happens when you continually shut down your mains frequently? You create a little bit of water hammer. Again, weaker points in your system show up. So we have seen increased breaks, but so have our other clients. I think that's the nature. Yeah, that's
Cracking and dry.
right. The soil shrinks, and again, we're noticing in particular, though, that when we shut the water mains down more frequently, that there are more breaks in these older systems. Again, we all know Cook County has old water mains, just.
But we anticipated this going, and we knew it's been, I appreciate all the patience the residents have shown. There's been a lot of dust, a lot of construction everywhere, and the water shutoffs, but there's no way to fix these and replace these without shutting off the water and doing it, so, it's just part of it, so.
It is. Okay, so moving on to the 22 water, to the lead water service replacement be included in the project plan. So again, in 2022, we approved a water rate increase, which generates about $750,000 a year for lead services. We get 0% interest rate on the lead services, and it's over 30 years, so we can fund approximately $22.5 million in lead service rate replacement with the 22 water rate increase. Done a couple projects, again, 24 lead water service project going on now, as you mentioned, throughout lots of parts of town. There's 685 services being replaced. Our loan amount was a little over $7.5 million, and anticipate substantial completion by end of '24. There's a lot of water services to get done by the second half of the year. We did receive notice. We were on the intended funding list for our lead water services, so we did get the grant funding. We've got $10 million reserved for us in '25. Again, we'll be out to bid early in '25, start work in March, April. I've got 650 lead water services estimated. I get the math doesn't work out we got a little more in '24. It's because we got extremely attractive bids back in '24. They came in, the first two were 55% of our estimate and 60% of our estimate. We hope to get those again, but I'm presenting you with what our typical estimated price is. So we should get at least 650. We may get more like 850, 900 if we get the same sort of bids. And construction would start and end in '25 for that project. So again, summarizing, $22.5 million generated by that lead water service increase. Between the two projects, we have obligated little over $17.5 million. So we have approximately $5 million more that the 22 increase can provide revenue for. That's about 325 more lead services. And then I just added a line at the bottom for future consideration as I think we want to keep pursuing these lead service loans. Our tack that the village has taken is get them done now while they're less expensive than they will be 5 or 10 years from now. Got good success getting loans from the EPA. But it takes about a 37-cent increase in the water rate per 1,000 gallons, generates another $5 million in loan that we can apply for. And again, each $5 million gets about 325 lead water services. I did want to give you a projection on what we're looking at in the future. A lot of prices are changing as we go. The estimates will change. The number of services, we have a pretty good count on, but we're still a few unknowns that we're looking at. But current estimate for lead service, not including what's been replaced. So in our inventory, we had 3,087 lead water services. After the 24 and 25 projects completed, we'll have approximately 1,680 services left to be done. So total remaining costs, and again, this is what my conservative estimate is, about $25 million is what we're looking at funding after the 25 lead water service replacement project. I put a line that sort of 22 water rate increase generates a revenue for an additional $5 million. We've obligated all but $5 million. So if we need 25 million total, that means we need another 20 million for future lead service replacement. To give the board an idea, again, this is an estimate, but another $1.50 per 1,000 gallons would generate the revenue needed for the additional 20 million. So it gives you a ballpark estimate. As prices increase, things can change, but that's, we got 10 million. We have another 25 million. If we can get 10, 10, and 5, we could be done in 3 years. I'm not saying that's what'll happen, but the EPA made the comment when we got to 10 million that we demonstrated that we had the ability to expend it. So I anticipate being on the higher end in future years. Again, I just want to mention we'll get the entire area of the village qualified for lead service replacement. That gives us flexibility to replace it anywhere in the village. And will allow application, right, I just mentioned that we can submit our funding nomination forms for any services we want and for the next 5 years throughout the village. And again, if there's questions, happy to answer, and ultimately just looking for concurrence that the village board is in support of the approach we presented tonight.
Questions or comments from the board?
Thank you so much for doing all this. I've heard comments from the community out and about that we're excited to be getting ahead of things and getting this funding while we can. People are happy about it.
Good.
I've had other towns that are jealous how we're so far ahead in getting going, and it was, staff brought it forward. This board had the fortitude and the courage to pass the water rate increase, and we've lived up to doing it what we said we were going to do with it, and we're getting the benefit of the lower costs and the 0% interest loans and things that's making us move faster than any other town around. And again, I know it's been a very difficult construction season to travel through the village, but I hate to say it, get used to it. It looks like it's going to be this way for a couple of years, but these things have to be done. I mean, this is a federal mandate on the lead service, and the water mains are just, we have 100-year-old water mains. These things have to be done, so. So consensus on the board to move forward with the plan?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.
Is there any formal, there'll be applications or things that, require resolutions? We'll deal with those as we go forward, just?
Yes.
Okay. Derek, thank you very much.
I just want to acknowledge Derek is the quarterback of all of this. He's been diligent and very proactive and creative in finding these funding options. When we start construction, Vince and his staff are the ones fielding the phone calls and dealing with all, and I agree with the board's comments. We understand that it's dirty, it's ugly, it's an inconvenience. That generates complaints, that generates issues. Vince and his staff are handling that. And the Wizard of Oz behind the scenes, Mr. Doug Cooper, is the one I always ask him, are you on top of all this? There's a lot of money that's coming in, has to be, and there's a lot of paperwork and application and then compliance and so forth. And Doug stays on top of all that. So it's really been a terrific effort by all of you guys.
Thank you. Thank you all. All right, thank you, Derek. All right, the last item, Doug's annual presentation and attempt to explain to everyone what the annual tax levy and truth in taxation law is and why he's asking for what he's asking for in terms of the levy?
Hello. So this is the annual estimated tax levy discussion we have. By law, we're required to do what's called the Truth in Taxation Resolution. It basically estimates the levy and determines whether or not we're going to have a public hearing on it in December. We normally have the public hearing, so, but this document will tell you, and it will drive our budget process when we look at the property taxes. So, as I said there, the village is required to estimate and approve the annual levy. This does not obligate the levy. This can always be changed. It's just an estimate. And it does set the date for the public hearing, which will be held at the meeting in December, which is on December 9th. Under the Property Tax Extension Limitation Act, or PTEL as they call it, the levy can be increased by 5%, the lower of 5%, or the CPI. This year's the CPI is 3.4%. So that's what drives our tax levies, that 3.4% figure. Ultimately, it ends up being that we're going to ask about 4% to include some new growth and stuff. As it says there, our new growth, I estimated at about $1 million, which is an estimate of new growth average over the last 7 years. And that new growth should bring in about another $25,000 to the extension. Okay, there it is. The village is requesting a levy at 4%. That's ultimately where we want to go. The numbers are going to be shown at the end of this presentation here. It's 0.6% above the 3.4%. So we can go to the next slide. Is that, okay, so our total levy for the village is $13,428,000. We levy for the library as well as the village. But when I talk about this $13 million, that's the levy for the village, and it does include the debt service for our 2016, 18, and 20 bond service.
Doug, at this point, could I have you explain more to the audience or the public why we levy more for possible additional growth?
Because under PTEL, you're limited to the amount that you can levy, and if you don't get the levy in for that additional growth, then you're out of it forever. You miss that opportunity to levy a property tax on any new growth. And so if we don't hit it on the year that we apply for it, and our extension, we don't hit our maximum extension and we're actually below it, then we lose that incremental property taxes forever.
And can you explain what a growth would be, like what would generate a growth?
Sure, I mean, it's all of the natural assessments on property improvements, new facilities going up. Basically, like if every time a large complex goes up, we're doing this building over here on the old St. Barb's school. That'll add to the new growth. And it's just a natural growth that is acquired because people are doing work on their homes.
Thank you. I just, sometimes people don't understand what you mean, why we can go above the 3.4. So.
Yeah, so you want to hit that. You want to try and capture that new growth, because otherwise, like I said, you lose it going forward. So we're looking at a 4%. My estimates show that a market value home at $300,000 is going to cost about $169 more a year, and that's with the 4%. Each 1% increase in the levy amounts to about $130,000. Let's see, the previous year's levy increased by 4.7% over the 22 levy. This year, we're looking for 3.4%. We're asking for 4. My guess is it's going to fall slightly below 4%. So it generally falls below it. And then this is our final numbers here. Our 2024 proposed tax levy, the total for the village shows up as $13,428. And then the library is asking, their board approved their appropriations levy at the last board meeting in I guess it was last week, for $2.9 million. So the total levy that we're going to be looking for that shows up in the resolution here and probably will eventually show up in the tax levy ordinance, which will be presented in December, is going to be $16,287,000. And so this resolution here, the Truth in Taxation Resolution, will go to the next meeting in November for your review and approval.
Okay. Questions or comments from the board?
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends the items we have on the regular business for the committee of the whole. We do have executive session that I'm going to ask the board to go into executive session in a few minutes, but I'm going to open it up again, once again, for public comment. Is there any public comment from anyone right now? CP?
It's me again, in the absence of the liaison from the Chamber of Commerce representative. I would mention a couple of things very quickly regarding the distance that a food vendor issue can be from a brick and mortar restaurant. I know this is a source of great concern to restaurateurs in town, and I would suggest that you maybe want to take a little more time than what you're talking about, making a decision and running it through at the next meeting, because I'm sure, that, number one, they would appreciate if you contacted them and maybe got their opinion of what it is. When you do it, I suggest you make very sure that you have an exact method of how the measurement is made, because you will have jailhouse attorneys who are telling you, well, I'm measuring from the front door, I'm not measuring from the lot line, garbage like this. I don't think you could put a food vendor truck on Grand Boulevard, because I think if you were too close to one restaurant, far enough away from one restaurant, you'd be too close to another one. But also across the street becomes an issue and things like this, so think about it very carefully. Last but not least, as I say, I knew Rick Cavalier went crazy. He had Cupie's, which was a little spot up here on, just off the circle, and somebody came in to town and set up, he was doing it one day and his girlfriend was doing it the other day, a hot dog push cart going around the circle. And Rick just went crazy. He put up signs in his store about how not paying taxes and lack of cleanliness of such an operation. And of course, he was selling hot dogs too, so he had a vested interest. But this is one of those things. Last but not least, I would mention that I know Gina Shercrow, who was the farmer's market manager, had a problem with a food truck that was parked just across the bridge. And once again, that issue of how far you're measuring it and things like this. And she had food vendors who were actually paying to be in the farmer's market, and this guy was getting a freebie, which bothered her, so you might want to look into that issue as well. And that's my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, CP. Any other comments from anyone in the audience? Okay, that ends the items and the public comment. We are going to go into executive session, so at 8:30 PM, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Section 2C1 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific village employees, and pursuant to Section 2C5 of the Open Meetings Act to discuss purchase or lease of real property for the village's use.
So moved.
Second.
The motion to go into executive session was made by trustee Cote and seconded by trustee Kaluzny. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Nermatsu?
Aye.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned into executive session at 8:31. Executive session will be conducted here in the boardroom.